Welcome to the debate. Imagine waking up to find yourself labeled an international romance scammer to your entire professional network,
Yeah, that is a nightmare.
right? And simultaneously having to fend off fabricated Interpol warrants. It begs the question, how do you fight an invisible enemy? Usually when we think of conflict, we picture physical boundaries. You see the opponent, you see the weapons, the damage is visible. But today, we are examining a conflict where those boundaries completely evaporate.
Exactly. It's a battlefield that exists everywhere and nowhere all at once. We are looking at a highly intense case study in asymmetric digital warfare and legal forensics. Specifically, the transnational digital conflict between Alberto Daniel Hill, who is a Uruguayan cybersecurity expert, and his former partner, Suvi Hill.
Who operates online under the handle CyberGurl10.
Right, CyberGurl10.
And we are drawing this debate directly from a massive cache of source material. We've got detailed forensic dossiers, legal memorandums from multiple jurisdictions, and comprehensive behavioral assessments tracking the digital footprints of everyone involved here. It is a totally fascinating collision of cold, hard data and raw human emotion. And just to frame my perspective right at the top, I've looked at the forensic reality of this case, and I argue that Alberto's defense is practically flawless. I mean, it demonstrates high structural maturity against an emotionally immature aggressor.
Right. And while I don't dispute the forensic data, I argue that while his defense is undeniably effective, the aggressor's actions really must be understood as a severe psychological displacement of trauma, which makes the ensuing legal destruction of her life a tragic target mismatch rather than like a victory over a mastermind.
I think the best way to understand this is to look at how both sides actually operated, and I'll put some hard numbers on it. I've analyzed Alberto's strategy, and I rank it a perfect 10 out of 10.
Wow, a perfect 10.
Just a clinical way of saying he completely refused to get dragged into the mud. He instituted a strict zero-contact policy and let objective, irrefutable data do all the talking.
Right.
In stark contrast, I'd score Suvi's strategy a 1 out of 10. Her approach relied entirely on public defamation and extortive threats. She was messaging him things like, "What if I tell your mother?"
Yeah, that is rough.
It is. It's entirely rooted in procedural and emotional immaturity.
Well, I understand why you'd score it that way if we are only looking at the forensic output. But I rank Alberto's strategy an 8 out of 10.
Okay? An 8.
Yeah, an 8. Because, yes, it is brilliantly architected, but it is fundamentally destructive. And I give Suvi's a 3 out of 10, not because it's a good legal strategy. I mean, it is disastrous, but because it is psychologically predictable. When you read the behavioral assessments, her digital attacks are not calculated Machiavellian malice. This is a textbook manifestation of displaced aggression and ego depletion.
Now, if you're listening to this, you might be wondering what exactly drove that displaced aggression? How does someone jump to that level of public attack?
You really have to look at the broader context in the source material. Right before this conflict escalated, Suvi's ex-husband smuggled their undocumented 11-year-old daughter across European borders.
From Belgium to France, right?
Exactly. And during a level 3 terrorism threat, no less. That is an international felony. It's a crisis of the absolute highest order. Yet Suvi remained completely passive and silent about it online.
Interesting.
Right? Instead, she redirected the massive chronic stress from that severe legal crisis onto Alberto. She basically exploded over a minor boundary he set regarding a 5-minute phone call. She dumped all that unresolved trauma onto the safest available target.
Well, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If a bank gets robbed, we don't excuse the getaway driver just because they had a stressful week. If Suvi's actions are just displaced aggression, how do you account for the highly calculated nature of fabricating fake Interpol and Europol warrants?
Well, I mean,
The Uruguayan Ministry of the Interior formally confirmed those warrants do not exist. That isn't just an emotional outburst. That is a deliberate fabrication of state-level documents to inflict psychological torture.
I come at it from a different way. I argue that the fabrication of those warrants actually proves my point. It isn't the work of a calculated criminal genius. It is the erratic flailing of an exhausted individual.
How so?
She is relying on these online spaces, these digital campfires, to survive her reality. When you are isolated and terrified, you build a campfire and invite people to sit around to invalidate you, creating a narrative where she is the victim of an international scammer, complete with exaggerated or fabricated police involvement, is her desperate attempt to regain a sense of control in a life that feels entirely out of her hands.
So you're saying the fake Interpol warrants are just the symptom of an empty emotional tank?
Exactly. It's the psychological equivalent of a drowning person pulling someone else under, which brings us to the core of the target mismatch theory in the dossiers. Like, why was Alberto the specific target? Why not attack the ex-husband who actually committed the felony?
Well, you mentioned psychological accessibility.
Yes. Her ex-husband, a former police officer who just committed an international abduction, represents a high physical and legal threat. He is dangerous to confront.
Whereas Alberto was deeply vulnerable. The source material details his 2017 wrongful imprisonment in Uruguay, where he spent 8 months in a maximum security prison.
Right.
And that was simply for responsibly reporting a cybersecurity vulnerability, all due to the state's technological illiteracy.
Precisely. That systemic trauma left Alberto with severe PTSD. He spent years painstakingly rebuilding his identity around trust and radical transparency. So to Suvi's depleted ego, Alberto was a psychologically accessible partner. Like water flowing down the path of least resistance, he was a safe target to absorb the rage that she couldn't direct at her ex-husband.
That insight about the safe target is fascinating, but we have to acknowledge the profound objective cruelty of it. You say he was a safe target, but she specifically weaponized his deepest systemic trauma.
Yeah.
His unjust experience with the justice system. She weaponized that by threatening him with fake police warrants. She knew exactly what levers to pull to cause maximum terror. And we must emphasize the devastating collateral damage here, because this wasn't just two people arguing in a vacuum.
No, it definitely wasn't.
The digital assault induced a severe physiological collapse in Alberto's 73-year-old mother. The clinical records show the acute distress and panic from Suvi's threats confined his mother to a wheelchair. When we talk about maturity, a mature adult stops when a 73-year-old woman's health collapses.
That collateral damage is horrifying, and I don't excuse it for a second. But I maintain that this perfectly illustrates the paradox of ego depletion. It is exactly because she is operating in a state of displaced aggression that she cannot calibrate her response. She is so consumed by the unresolved trauma of her daughter's abduction that her psychological bandwidth is entirely consumed.
So she just can't see the damage she's doing.
She literally lacks the capacity for empathy regarding Alberto's mother. It's not a calculated decision to be cruel to an elderly woman. It's a complete inability to see anything outside her own immediate crisis.
I understand the mechanism you're describing, but the law doesn't care about ego depletion when you are committing a crime.
Well, true.
Which brings us to the actual devastating reality of her legal situation. We have to look at the long-term consequences of Suvi failing to respect Alberto's boundaries. Alberto built what I would call a digital Faraday cage.
A Faraday cage. I like that.
Yeah, an architectural defense that completely neutralized the incoming static of her defamation. When Suvi weaponized high-trust professional platforms like LinkedIn to label him a cocaine addict, he didn't write an emotional, angry rebuttal. He published certified, clean clinical toxicology panels.
He stripped away any defense of truth she might have tried to claim later.
Exactly. And let's look at the romance scammer allegation. She claimed he was refusing to pay a debt. Alberto didn't just deny it, he weaponized anti-money laundering or AML compliance rules.
This part is wild.
For those wondering how banking laws stop online harassment, it's actually brilliant. Alberto actively tried to transfer the funds to her, but international banks strictly require passport and routing data to clear the transaction. Suvi deliberately refused to provide them. By documenting this, Alberto proved the financial blockage was her own regulatory sabotage. He grounded her emotional attacks in forensic reality.
It's highly effective structural containment.
And he went further. He used cryptographic PGP keys to sign every public statement. Think of a PGP key as a digital wax seal that mathematically proves exactly when a document was created and guarantees it hasn't been altered by a single comma.
Right, it's irrefutable.
By cryptographically locking his defense, he completely removed her ability to ever walk into a court and claim he was doctoring data after the fact. And Alberto's legal team established a gold rule injunction. They explicitly told her, if you keep these defamatory posts live, we will not negotiate, and the files go straight to active court execution. By ignoring that physical and digital boundary, she has permanently neutralized her own original financial claim.
Right, she effectively legalized a court-ordered financial offset. The moral and punitive damages she now owes far exceed the original debt she was trying to collect.
Exactly. And let's evaluate the highly specific corporate risks she now faces, because her options are vanishingly small at this point. Alberto's team is executing a total structural containment strategy. They are forwarding the certified digital forensics dossier directly to her employer's HR and compliance departments.
Yeah, that's a massive escalation.
In the modern corporate environment, being linked to multi-jurisdictional cyber harassment and criminal stalking is an unacceptable liability. She is triggering the imminent risk of termination for cause. She is going to lose her corporate livelihood.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. I am not debating the legality. Alberto has the forensic evidence, the clinical panels, AML compliance records. He has the absolute legal right to defend himself. But sending stalker dossiers to her HR department, does that cross the line from structural defense into disproportionate retaliation? It feels less like shielding himself and more like actively dismantling her entire life.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. You are looking at the HR notification as an aggressive attack rather than a necessary containment mechanism. I mean, how do you force compliance from someone who refuses to respect institutional authority?
You hit them where they work.
You use the institutions they depend on. Let's look at the remaining legal risks she brought upon herself. She faces a $335,000 civil lawsuit for moral damages and the loss of his international consulting earnings. But the civil torts are literally the least of her worries. There are active criminal ledgers.
You mean the data protection authorities?
Yes, specifically the Italian Garante della Privacy. For listeners who might not know, the Garante is Italy's data protection authority, and under European law they have immense power. She is facing potential 1 to 6.5 years of imprisonment under the Italian Penal Code for stalking, specifically aggravated by the use of digital tools.
Wow.
Furthermore, because Alberto's team forwarded the behavioral logs regarding her daughter's unauthorized border crossing, she is facing a potential European arrest warrant for complicity in child subtraction, proving that ignoring boundaries in the digital age results in total, structural, and geographic containment is not disproportionate retaliation. It is the objective consequence of asymmetric digital warfare. If you attack someone's livelihood, you cannot be surprised when they neutralize yours.
It really shatters the illusion that the internet is a borderless, consequence-free zone. The theory of ubiquity and cross-border defamation dictates that jurisdiction attaches wherever the damage is felt. She assumed that posting from another country made her safe. She thought the physical borders protected her, but Italian and Uruguayan authorities are actively tracking this.
She operated under the illusion that because she was sitting behind a keyboard, the laws of gravity just didn't apply. But Alberto's radical transparency grounded the conflict. He used the very system she tried to bypass to build an inescapable legal trap.
Yeah, the trap is definitely set.
Think about the AML documentation again. If she wants the money she claims she's owed, she has to provide her government ID for the banking transfer. But doing that hands the Italian prosecutors her verified identity for the stalking indictment. It is a flawless architectural defense. She is completely boxed in.
She is boxed in, but I want to return to the human element here. What are her options now? Her legal counsel must be telling her to issue unambiguous public clarifications. She has to retract the romance scammer allegations. She has to explicitly acknowledge that she is the one who blocked the financial transfer by withholding the banking documentation.
Right. She has to come clean.
Because if she doesn't comply and lower the temperature, her ex-husband will almost certainly leverage her documented behavioral instability in family court to secure sole custody of their daughter. The walls are closing in on every dimension of her life, her job, her freedom of movement within the Schengen area, her finances, and her family.
Which brings us right back to maturity. An emotionally mature person, when faced with that matrix of catastrophic risk, issues the retraction. They take the 10 minutes to clear the air, as Alberto's lawyer requested, to mitigate the damage. The refusal to do so, the insistence on keeping the defamatory posts live right next to images of Alberto's published book, proves premeditative malice.
You think it's purely malice?
In cross-border litigation, displaying his elite professional credentials while simultaneously trying to destroy his market value shows she knows exactly what she is doing.
But again, you are applying the logic of a rational actor to a mind that is drowning. She knows he wrote a book. She knows he's an expert. But her need to exert control over something, because she has zero control over her ex-husband or the international custody system, that overrides her basic survival instinct. It's a tragic paradox. She is so desperate to be seen as a resilient survivor online that she is systematically destroying her actual real-world survival.
It is a striking contradiction. To summarize my position in light of all this evidence, Alberto's 10 out of 10 strategic maturity is the only viable paradigm here. When you are the victim of a character assassination attempt that targets your professional livelihood and the physical health of your family, you cannot rely on the emotional empathy of your attacker. You must utilize forensic reality. You must deploy clean toxicology panels, uncompromising legal injunctions, and multi-state enforcement protocols. His strategy proves that the truth, when cryptographically secured and legally routed, can absolutely dismantle a digital smear campaign.
And to summarize my perspective, I do not dispute that Alberto's defense is a masterclass in legal architecture. He survived the assault brilliantly. But we cannot ignore the psychological drivers. The entire conflict remains a tragic study in how unresolved domestic trauma, the chronic stress of a child abduction, the failure of international legal protections can curdle into displaced aggression. It shows how easily a victim of one circumstance can become the aggressor in another, using the internet to digitally destroy multiple lives simply because they lack the emotional bandwidth to cope with their reality.
I think we have reached a vital point of convergence here. Regardless of whether we view this primarily as a forensic legal battle or a psychological tragedy, we both agree that the public digital sphere is a highly dangerous arena for resolving private disputes. Weaponizing high-trust networks isn't just venting, it is an act of asymmetric warfare.
Absolutely. The long-term consequences of cyber harassment are devastating for all involved. Alberto's mother is in a wheelchair. Alberto's hard-won professional peace was shattered, and Suvi is facing the loss of her career, her finances, and potentially her liberty. The collateral damage is staggering.
It really highlights the value of looking at both the forensic data and the psychological drivers simultaneously. We barely scratched the surface of the complexities in the source material regarding cross-border digital jurisdiction and how international law is rushing to catch up with the realities of digital displacement.
It forces us to ask hard questions about how trauma operates in the digital age and the permanent footprint we leave behind when we let our pain dictate our actions online.
We may not be able to tape off a digital crime scene, and the battle lines might be invisible. But as we've seen today, the casualties are very, very real. We will leave it to the listener to evaluate the strategies, the maturity levels, and the ultimate consequences of this transnational conflict for themselves.